Housing is in crisis. Rents are rising. Buying a home feels impossible. Young people delay starting families because they cannot afford enough space. In major cities, even people with good jobs are spending an absurd share of their income simply to remain close to opportunity. And the usual prediction is that this will only get worse. More people will compete for limited land. Cities will become increasingly crowded. Homes will become permanently unaffordable. But this prediction may be based on a future that is no longer arriving. In the previous episode of Simple Speculations, we looked at one of the most common fears about falling birth rates. Fewer babies are being born, populations are aging. The number of traditional workers may eventually begin to shrink. This is usually presented as an economic disaster, but that argument assumes that economic production will continue to depend primarily on the number of human workers. AI, robotics, and automation challenge that assumption. A future economy may produce more goods and services with fewer workers. Economic output may become less dependent on how many young people enter the workforce. And this demographic shift has another consequence that receives far less attention. If fewer people are born, societies will not need an endlessly growing supply of homes. If AI and automation become the main drivers of production, people may no longer need to crowd into a handful of expensive cities just to access productive work. These two trends could arrive together: fewer people competing for housing and fewer people forced to live near traditional centers of employment. That does not mean the housing crisis is imaginary. It is real today, but it may not be permanent. I'm Jan, and this is Simple Speculations. Today, I want to ask another uncomfortable question. What if the housing crisis is not evidence that humanity is running out of space? What if it is the temporary result of an economy that still depends on population growth, human labor, and physical proximity? What are we actually paying for? Imagine two homes. The first is a small apartment in London, Berlin, New York, Istanbul, or San Francisco. It is crowded, it is noisy, it may be old, it may have no garden, no parking, and barely enough storage. Yet it costs a fortune. The second is a much larger home in a declining town or rural region. It has more space. It may have a garden, it may cost less than half as much. The difference is not primarily the building. The difference is access. Access to jobs, access to clients, access to universities, access to hospitals, access to airports, schools, restaurants, culture, and social networks. When people buy or rent housing in an expensive city, they are not simply paying for shelter, they are paying for proximity. Much of what we call the housing crisis may therefore be a proximity crisis. The economy is still organized around human labor. Despite decades of digital technology, most people still organize their lives around access to employment. Companies concentrate in major cities because workers are there. Workers move to those cities because companies are there. Investors, universities, suppliers, hospitals, restaurants, and professional services follow. This creates a self-reinforcing cycle. A small number of cities accumulate a disproportionate amount of economic opportunity. Millions of people are then forced to compete for housing near those locations. But AI and automation may begin to weaken this cycle. If production increasingly comes from software, machines, autonomous systems, and robotics, economic activity may require fewer people to gather in the same place. A company may no longer need thousands of employees commuting to a central office. A factory may no longer require an enormous local labor pool. A logistics network may operate with autonomous vehicles, warehouses, and delivery systems. Professional services may be delivered remotely with the help of AI. The important change is not merely that some people will work from home. The deeper change is that human labor itself may become less central to where productive capacity is located. Today, people often move to where the jobs are. In a more automated economy, jobs, services, capital, and productive systems may become more capable of moving toward people. That gives individuals more freedom to decide where they actually want to live. Near family, near nature, in a smaller town, in a larger home, in a different country, or still in a dense city, because they genuinely prefer it, rather than because leaving would destroy their career. Population changes the equation. The 20th century trained us to expect continuous population growth. More children, more households, larger cities, more construction, more demand for land. Housing policy was built around the assumption that each generation would be larger than the previous one. But in much of the world, this is no longer true. Fewer babies are being born. Populations are aging. Some countries are already shrinking. Others would shrink without immigration. Even many countries that are still growing are expected to reach a population peak. This does not mean housing demand disappears overnight. Population and housing demand are not identical. People are living alone more often. Households are becoming smaller. Migration continues to concentrate demand in successful cities. Older housing may exist in the wrong places or require renovation. A shrinking country can still have an acute housing shortage in its most economically successful regions. But the long-term direction matters. A society with fewer children does not need to build for endless population expansion. Over time, existing housing passes from older generations to smaller, younger generations. Homes are inherited, sold, divided, renovated, or left vacant. Some regions may eventually face the opposite of today's crisis. Too many homes, too few residents, too little economic activity to support the surrounding infrastructure. We can already see early versions of this in shrinking towns and rural regions. The central problem is not necessarily a lack of buildings. The problem is that many available buildings are disconnected from opportunity. Two transformations may happen together. This is where the demographic and technological stories meet. Fewer babies mean slower population growth and eventually smaller populations in many countries. AI and automation mean economic production may depend less on the number and physical location of human workers. Remote services can reduce the need to live near every institution. Autonomous transportation can expand the practical distance between home and city. Drones and automated delivery can bring goods to less dense regions. Distributed manufacturing can spread production across a wider geography. Cheaper, automated construction can increase the supply of functional housing. These changes reinforce each other. Population decline reduces pressure on the total housing stock. Automation reduces pressure on specific employment centers. Better transport and logistics make currently inconvenient locations more viable. Cheaper construction reduces the cost of creating or replacing homes where they are still needed. The future may therefore give people something they have rarely had, a genuine choice of where to live. Today, many people say they choose city life. But how much of that choice is real? Would they still choose a tiny apartment, high rent, noise, congestion, and limited space if they could obtain comparable work, healthcare, education, delivery, and social access elsewhere? Some would, many would not. Dense cities will not disappear. People value culture, nightlife, spontaneity, community, and human contact. But cities may need to compete for residents instead of residents competing desperately for access to cities. That would be a profound reversal. The future is not today with higher prices. The standard housing forecast takes today's conditions and extends them forward. More demand, more scarcity, more expensive land, more unaffordable cities. But that forecast assumes that the underlying system remains unchanged. It assumes populations continue growing. It assumes economic output continues depending on large human workforces. It assumes productive work remains concentrated in a few locations. It assumes transportation continues consuming human attention. It assumes services must remain physically nearby. It assumes construction stays slow and labor intensive. Every one of those assumptions may weaken. The housing crisis is real, but the forces creating it may not be permanent. As with the debate over low birth rates, the mistake is to treat today's constraints as eternal laws. A smaller population is not automatically an economic catastrophe if machines can produce more with less labor. And expensive cities are not automatically humanity's permanent future if people no longer need to live beside the machines, offices, factories, and institutions that create economic value. The future housing problem may not be that humanity runs out of space. It may be whether we successfully connect existing space to jobs, services, infrastructure, and human community. The question is not simply whether housing can become abundant. The question is whether people will gain the freedom to live where they actually want to live. I'm John. This is Simple Speculations, and I'll see you in the next one. If you enjoyed this, please like the video and subscribe to Simple Speculations.